Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of the Deep Dive with Eyal Shai. Today I'm joined by João Mateus. Hi, João.
Hi, Al. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. What is an idea that's been helping you live well?
Yeah, so I would say learning how to improvise better. I spent like more than half of my life playing the guitar, and like in that period, I spent almost so I want to say like 8 years probably just studying jazz and improvisation. And understanding the basics of musical improvisation was like phenomenal to then help me realize how to improvise better in my day to day. And so this whole relationship between music improvisation and improvising in life is something that for the past years has been helping me a lot. So that's the main idea, I guess.
Yeah, and it's something that I wish I could say I played an instrument. I never have. I barely have a functioning sense of rhythm, but I can appreciate it. And I'm kind of jealous that you came upon this idea like early in life. But can you describe maybe something, I don't know, something from your childhood that really is connected with that?
Yeah, so I'll give you like the way I got into music, like the story that I got in, how I got into music. So basically, I was a professional swimmer until I was like 12, and I really enjoyed it. But it came to a point where I was just traveling the country to all these different places, just swimming. I was getting really tired of it. I was practicing like every single day, and I'm from this small town that in Portugal called Alcobaça, but like I was training in Nazaré, which you also know. So basically I was doing all that journey every single day, and just then swimming and then coming back to Alcobaça, and then on the weekends I would travel all around Portugal, and I was getting really tired. So I told my mom that I don't know if this is for me. I just want to quit. And both my mother and my parent believed that my education would be more complete if I got into school, of course, but also have some other activity to complement school. And so we had a guitar. Both my mother and parent knew how to play a few chords, and they were like, "Well, it wouldn't be great if someone knew really how to play and how to read music and all that stuff." And so I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't yet a rebel kid, and so I would do what my mother would say, basically. And so I started to learn how to play the guitar, and I sucked at it. Like, I didn't enjoy it at all. It was crazy how, like, I would go to the classes, I would bring like the guitar, I would take the guitar out of the bag, I tried to play, I would pack the guitar, I would go home, leave the guitar alone for a week, and then repeat this process over and over again, right? And so, but because I was smart, I always tried to, basically, I tried to play whatever we were learning, like at first sight. So just trying to ace it, which usually didn't win that well. And so my other approach would be, I would ask philosophical questions to the teacher. So he would spend a lot of time just talking about it, and we would cut a class time. But that wasn't a viable strategy. And one day, my teacher was like in a 45-minute class, he spent like 42 just destroying me and saying things like, "Oh, you are wasting your time. You're wasting my time. This doesn't make any sense. You don't study. You should quit this." Like all this crazy stuff. And I remember like leaving that classroom, closing the door, guitar on my back, and I would go like, "Oh, really? You'll see about that." And I went home and I started to practice like a madman, and I fell in love with it. And so basically I went from the kid who wasn't going to ever be able to play the guitar to the best student in school. I represented the school in a bunch of contests, and I decided I wanted to be a musician. And so basically like it wasn't one of the, like this teacher that spent all this time just destroying me. He's a very good friend of mine today. He plays with this very known Portuguese band. Yeah, absolutely. We became like 3 weeks after he said that, like we were already like very connected, because suddenly I was a kid who was very, very, very interested in
So did
proving.
he? Do you think he had an idea that like he did that for this effect exactly, or was he just genuinely out of
I have
patience
no
with you?
idea. I have no idea. Like, it worked. It seriously worked. And like, a part of me wants to think that he had that insight, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And actually, I never asked him because I think he doesn't even remember this. Like,
Right.
there was one time where we were playing at a small bar, and we were both playing. I had my band, he had his, and afterwards we were just talking, and I was like, well, I didn't even want to learn how to play the guitar. Like, it was because of you, like because of that class where you just destroyed me for
Hmm.
42 minutes. And he was like, what? I did what? And I was like, yeah, he doesn't even remember. So I guess he didn't had that insight. But yeah, so basically I decided I wanted to be a musician. I spent, like, this was in seventh grade, so I spent like those 3 years just learning how to play. I formed the band, and we played like the local bars, and it was very cool because we were like, all of us were basically teenagers. We were in ninth grade, so 14 years old, 15 years old, playing in these spots where everyone was drinking a lot of beer, and we would ask for like an orange juice because we couldn't drink.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so that whole experience was crazy as well. And then I was fortunate enough to, because I was learning how to play the classical guitar, but I really wanted to play like electric. Like my band, I was playing electric guitar, and I was fortunate enough to, in high school, like in Alcobaça, the school opened a professional course on music, which is basically this more technical approach to high school. And yeah, I did 3 years in high school studying music, specifically jazz, and that was like crazy. I learned a lot during that, and it actually helped me develop my entrepreneurial mindset, because like I was 16 years old and I had like 3 or 4 different groups. I was trying to sell my music. I was trying to understand what are some of the best players in the area that I can play with and learn with. I was also dealing with issues like, I have the best drummer in, like, I don't know, in the whole town, even bigger than town. Like, I was playing with a very, very good drummer, but he was one of those guys that he would never like be on schedule for rehearsals or for
Hmm.
even for concerts. So I was dealing with questions like, well, I have this very talented person right here, but he's also hurting the band by not being like on time and on being like a good professional. So am I going to keep in the band? Am I going to leave it? And so all those questions, I was facing that, all those dilemmas and all those challenges throughout like my teenage years, basically. And then I went to college, and that's like a whole another story. Because do you think it's relevant for me to tell you?
No, yeah, I think for me it's interesting. First of all, because I like it because I just listened to Flea talking with I can't even, what podcast was it, like the Mark Maron podcast. So I'm fascinated with all the intrigues behind the scenes on music bands and stuff. So that's really
Yeah.
cool. But that's just a side comment. Yeah, I think I get your meaning, because so many times in life, I think it's the default for many people to think things through, and this is what we're told, is like, you must come up with a plan. And there's such a huge bias, I think, in be it in literature or whenever you go online and you talk to people about starting a business or doing anything, and there's so much emphasis on planning correctly and following the footsteps of other people, as if you could ever do that, and not many people. I think then you start talking with actual people who have made it in a field or have gotten to some point where they've produced something good, and then you realize, like, in the end, you have to get wet and just, to go back to the swimming metaphor, just jump in the
Yeah.
water and start paddling, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so I think that's really beneficial that you had this background already of improvisation. In terms of your background, like, were you always drawn to improvisation, like a type of music that requires you to improvise, or is it just like in the, whenever you were writing your own songs or composing things?
No, it was like I from the moment I understood that there was this possibility of improvising in music, I was hooked. Like for the first 3 years, I was playing rock, and I was playing like literally whatever the guys were playing. I was just playing that. And then when I went to high school, and suddenly someone said, "Well, this is something called jazz," which like jazz wasn't the thing that I enjoyed, but like the improvisation aspect of it. Of course, now I enjoy deeply jazz, but back then I wasn't liking that much. Like the improvisational aspect of it was like, oh my god, this is so amazing, because I can play whatever I want, whatever I'm feeling like playing, right? And so and so I like improvisation was always something that I really enjoyed, and it still is, and like, and there are so many parallels between the musical improvisation and like in our day-to-day lives. Like I usually when I talk about this, I have this situation that I pose, which is like you have three possible scenarios. You wake up, you plan your day, and everything goes according to plan. To me, it never happens. Then you have the second scenario, which is you wake up, you plan your day, and like 19% of things go according to plan. There's only one or two things where they don't, and that to me rarely happens. And the third one, and more common one in my life and in life of people that I used to talk with, is you wake up, you plan your day, and then life happens, right? And suddenly you're going through a bunch of experiences that you didn't plan. And maybe you got some piece of good news or bad news, or suddenly someone calls you, or you have like this, or you're laid off or fired, or you actually have this job opportunity. So you have all these things that you didn't plan. And to all of those situations, the only thing that you can do is to basically improvise, right? So we spend, in my worldview, if we use this worldview as like a lens to watch life, we spend a lot of time improvising, a lot of time dealing with the unknown, right? And it's crazy to me that we spend so much time improvising, but besides musicians or improv theater, like most people don't even know the basics of improvisation, right? And so it's crazy to me that we spend so much time improvising, but no one ever tells you like, well, first of all, improvisation can be studied. It's not acing things. You can actually learn how to improvise better. And second, if you're going to be on a lot of contexts where you need to improvise, maybe it should be something that you think about preparing for those different contexts. And there's a lot of parallels. Like I remember the first time that I gave a course, like a training course, there was this 2-day course on emotional intelligence, and that was the first time I realized that spending so much time studying like musical improvisation was actually helping me to improvise in other contexts. Because I was giving this 2-day course on emotional intelligence. I read like thousands of books and hundreds of videos and all that stuff to get prepared. It was this 2-day course divided into 2 mornings and 2 afternoons, and each morning and afternoon were divided into parts. And so it was my first course. I was very anxious. I had like 27 managers of a big company in Portugal just sitting there listening. And I was like, we did the first part, and I told everyone, well, we're going to take a break. And as soon as people leave, I'm like, oh, this is going very well. I'm really enjoying it. So I look at my notebook, and I realized that in the first part of the first morning, I had given like all the ideas for the rest of the day, because I was so nervous that I was just talking and just shooting information all over the place. And suddenly I was like, oh, I don't have a plan. What am I going to do right now? And so in 9 minutes, like it was a 10-minute break. I spent 1 minute panicking, and in 9 minutes, I just started to improvise games. And the natural way that I was able to come up with these games by what I now see is to use the principles that I use in musical improvisation. I created these quick games, and then people come up back to the course. We did the games. They loved it. Like in the second day, I was able to pace myself better. But in the end, I asked them, well, what was your favorite part? And almost all of them said, oh, those little games that we played yesterday. And I was like, at the end of course, I was like, the only reason why I was able to do that was because I'm so used to improvisation in other contexts that I was able to practice the same principles. And that was the first time I realized, well, wow, what a great skill to have, and how valuable it is.
Right. So, yeah, for me, I'm the same way as a tour guide. I see tour guides who just have everything is just already set. They know what they're going to say where, and I just see all the places where it doesn't necessarily fit with the people you're with and so on. So I just like to go out there and see what comes up and comment, because in the end, like you say, there's going to be a bird that comes through and I'm like, oh, that's a rare bird, or all these. And I think it's important not to fall into the old tropes that you know so well, because you can then be also as excited as the people that are with you, and I try to keep this freshness with people where I'm also doing this for the first time, rather than, because you could go somewhere and like not comment on all the things that are unusual and make it seem that everything is normal. And in that scenario, you can kind of play the role of somebody who's like the boss, or like owns the place, or like really knows what they're doing. And I guess it's appealing to some people, both as, let's say, people who come to have an experience, or the people giving the experience. But to me, I much rather have the freshness of actually being able to improvise, so it's not boring for me, and then I can get along and be more on the side of the experiencer when it comes to experiencing things, and it just seems less boring, because our mind loves novelty and new things and things that it hasn't seen before, right? In terms of improvisation and how to actually work on it, what is the first thing that you would tell someone to like work on improvising? And then I'll follow up with another question, which you already have.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to pick up in your example. So what you just said, like the idea of just let's pick up as a tour guide, let's pick these people up and let's see what happens. The only reason why you can do this is because you have like these two competencies, which are fundamental to any jazz musician or anyone that wants to improvise. The first one is competence itself, right? So the only reason why you're able to let's just go and see what happens is because you'll see a bird and you know what kind of bird that bird is, or what kind of plant that is, or what's the story behind that building or behind that alley. So the first thing that you want to do if you want to improvise better is to understand, well, what is the context that I want to be able to improvise better and be very competent at that? There's just no other way. Like a jazz musician will be able to play any kind of chord that you put him in front of him because he knows all the chords and he practices like all the scales through all the chords, right? And that's the only reason why he can then improvise in whatever song pops up, because he knows literally all the chords that there is to know. So competence is very important. And the second one, so I would say that to practice improvisation, that would be the first thing, like become really competent at something. And the second thing is you need to be able to listen. What I mean by listening, I'm not talking about specifically listening with your ears, but to listen to the situation. So once again, in our example, if you're coming with a group, you're trying to understand what are they interested in. Like you're listening to the vibe that these people are saying. And maybe they say, like, I remember having a call with you and I was like, oh, and I'm a foodie. I really enjoy food when I'm traveling. You were like, oh, if you really enjoy food, then the place where you want to go is this one, not this one, because X, Y, and Z. And so you like, if you want to improvise, you want to be very competent, but you also want to listen to whatever the group or whatever the context is asking for, so you can then deliver that through your competence, right? And so I would guess, like, if you're starting to learn how to improvise, or if you want to be able to improvise better in a certain context, you want those two things. You want to be very competent at something, and that's like understanding, like, being good at your craft, basically. That's the best way to put it. And then you need to be listening to the situation and understanding like how to deal, or what is the situation demanding, and how can you provide it in the best way. So I would say to start with these two ideas.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That makes so much sense, and it makes me think that, even in art, even just in music, there are kind of two ways of making art, because the picture which I painted, quote unquote, first is that of a regular art, or I think people would say that's like normal art, is somebody who's writing, composing a song in their own room. They go, they practice it, they get out this beautiful product, and this can be a song, this can be a painting, whatever. And then it's out there, and they're not going to be in the room when somebody actually interacts with it. And it's kind of a one-way thing, and they have no control of how people perceive it or in what atmosphere. It's going to be played in a restaurant, it's going to be played in a theater, all these different things. And then the other mode of actually being live, right? This is why you can listen to a song in your room and yet you would still go to a live concert, because there's the interaction. And I think that's where the improvisation comes into play, because you said improvisation, I think you said interaction. It's almost something which is going together. There's just more fluidity there, and especially when it comes to relationships and actually being around other people. This is where improvisation is so important, because if I go back to my example, if you have the tour guide who just comes to perform and doesn't react, maybe this is a family with children. They don't care so much about so much talk. They like a game. Or it's a family of people who have a hard time walking, and all your only plan was to walk all day. You can see a lot of traps where the flow can be the flow can be dampened.
Stop. Yeah, you're adjusting, and that's why. Sorry to interrupt, but that's why, like, for me, being a jazz musician was the best school that I could have on human relationships. Because what happened is, I remember going to this a national contest to represent the university, and there was this very known jazz musician there, and he said something that really like shaped the way I saw music and also relationship with. He said that the function of any jazz musician is to make all the other musicians in the band sound better. So what means by this is, when you're playing with a group and you're listening to whatever people are playing, and if you're focused on how can I make that sound better, and if everyone does this, it suddenly becomes like this bigger than the music. Like, the band becomes an entity of its own, right? You're not like, it's not João playing and Eyal playing the drums. It's like they're together playing something bigger, right? And the only reason the only way you can do this is by being very active, by not judging whatever the other person is playing, and actually work on top of that, right? So as a tour guide, once again, picking up your example, let's say that I come around and I see that the family that I have has kids. My mindset can either be, well, they brought kids, that's their problem, I'm going to do this, right? Because that's the way I plan. Or it can be, okay, I have these two players, I want to play with them, so how can I adjust whatever I'm doing to play with them, right? And that's what happens a lot in jazz music, is you're playing and suddenly the drummer just changes the rhythm, or like the pianist gives this wrong chord, right? And it's your function, if you're soloing and the pianist plays this wrong chord, it's your function as a jazz musician to listen to that chord, and instead of just judging and thinking, how can I make that sound better, right? And you develop these very deep relationships that's why, like, you can, in a rock band, and I have this theory where in a rock band, like, you have the luxury to not like the other people and still be able to play live, because since everything is already scripted or written out, you're always playing the same solos, singing the same songs, you don't have to have a connection among you. Like, you can go there, play your part, and that's it. And Guns N' Roses come to mind, where Axl Rose and Slash didn't talk for like a bunch of years, and they were still playing live because their part was basically scripted. But like in jazz musician, in jazz music, if you're angry at your double bass player, that will notice. Like, people will notice, the band will notice, and everyone will notice, because you're not receptive to whatever he's playing, and likewise from the double bass to you, right? So I truly believe that the relationships, as you were saying, like improvisation is really important in relationships, and you need to be able to precisely understand, well, instead of judging whatever the other person is suggesting, or the vibe that is coming, or the reality that's happening, instead of fighting reality, you just accept it and you work with it. And like that whole mindset shift was something that I learned with improvisation, that I think everyone should, like, instead of fighting reality, just embrace it and work on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to something you said at some point. You said, oh, at that point, at like 12 or something, I wasn't yet a rebel. And then later on, you mentioned how, how did you say? Later on, you mentioned, I think, don't remember, but the idea is, it came to my mind. Oh, you said it's like, we don't teach enough improvisation to children.
Yeah.
And I was thinking in my mind, well, is that a coincidence, or is it in the service of people who are actually trying to run a business properly, or like have power, which, you know, have power and influence? It takes people that you can influence in order to do that, that are predictable in a way. Yeah. And if you want people to be predictable, you don't really nudge them toward becoming great improvisers or independent free thinkers, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, were you going to become a rebel no matter what, or is it partly improvisation and the reality that you learned this stuff that kind of took you more to a direction of like, hey, you know, there's this well-tread path where everybody's going because, you know, you're being funneled through this education system, which is kind of trying to crunch anyone who doesn't fit into the mold. And then you were probably just not going to take it anymore after learning that improvising is just more fun and more satisfying.
Absolutely. So that's such a great question. And I guess that, like, I think of myself as a deep thinker. So but I don't think I would be like a free thinker or an independent thinker if I didn't go through to music as a whole. And I would end up like being a very good engineer, academic, historian, or whatever. Because it makes total sense. It makes total sense. Like, and as you were saying, it maybe it's not a coincidence that we are not teaching kids how to improvise and how to come up with their own ideas and how.
No, it's scary. Things. Then you have unpredictable people. They just do things. They feel like one day, and then the next they do another, and they don't go through the conventional routes, and they don't. They might. They might do things.
It's funny because, like, I'm so glad that I got into music like 3 years, like in 7th grade and not in 9th grade, because in 9th grade in Portugal, you have to choose like which area are you going to follow. You have sciences, humanities, economics, and then the professional courses.
Right.
And because I was already playing for 3 years, I got the emotional strength to say to people that were surrounding me on 9th grade, that everyone, like my parents were always very supportive. They were like, you do whatever you want as long as you're good at it. But like the people around me, everyone else wasn't that supportive of me going to music. Right. Like, and they were saying, oh, look, study music on the side. You're a good student. You're a smart person. Go to sciences, or even maybe, okay, go to humanities if you like, but like stick with that. And I was like, I want to be a musician. And I'm very grateful. I tell them a lot of times that, like, I'm very grateful for my parents, because they say, look, whatever you want to do it as long as you do it good. Like, if I think that maybe if I had got into music like a little bit later, so in 9th grade, maybe I didn't have the passion to say, no, I'm going to pursue music. Maybe I would be like, yeah, maybe they're right. I'm going to study music on the side, and I'm going to go to the traditional route, maybe. But yeah, it makes sense, because educating kids and giving them like the tools so they can be like free thinkers, that's something scary if you want to be able to control and to be able to predict whatever is going to happen in society as a whole. So yeah, I never had that insight, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, I think I see this all the time. You know, we speak so highly of democracy, and I've seen many signs in Portugal when I was. They're very excited about the 50th year of the revolution, since the revolution soon next year, and we speak so highly of democracy, but there are really two kinds of democracy. There's the democracy where the focus is on, you know, one person, one vote, and it really doesn't matter who this person is. You know, they can be a complete idiot. Whereas, you know, if you have a democracy, I would think that you want then people to be as smart as possible and as, you know, as good as they can be in terms of critical thinking and free thinking and discerning things and having good judgment. And I think our education system really shows what kind of democracy we're aiming at. And there's a part in Lackeys, which is a Platonic dialogue, where there are four people and or two people want advice, and they're asking the advice from two generals. So these two generals don't agree between themselves. So they turn to Socrates and they ask him to cast the last vote so they know whose advice to take. And he's like, what are we just going to go with numbers and now not with anyone who's expert? Like, wouldn't you take expert advice over the advice of many people who are not expert? And they say, of course, yes, and so on. But later on, he plays a trick on them, which is really neat. And he kind of shows that now that he's convinced the two guys, they can actually outvote the other people. So this is, I'm just saying this to point out the problem with democracy is that it's a very fertile ground for demagogues, right? Because a demagogue a demagogue is a leader of people. He can just lead a group of people to say as he says. And now it's not really a democracy where it's one person, one vote, and they each have a reasoned opinion about something. No, it's actually a person now practically owns this whole group of people, right?
Yeah,
and it makes the whole endeavor of democracy very different from what it could be. And I feel like this relates to improvisation for the reasons you mentioned, because improvising as an individual creates a shit ton of confidence in you and about your abilities, and pushes you, if you do fail at some point, which is bound to happen, then it really pushes you to gain that competency which you were talking about, so that you don't, so-called stutter the next time, and you just go and you're able to improvise and being in the flow and achieving the competence and and the willingness to engage in that just is a total different experience from the first person perspective.
Of course. And you're entering, as you know, like in one of my favorite topics ever, which is education and everything wrong with the current educational system. And like I was listening to your story in the way you're talking about like the democracy or the kind of democracy we have, and I was thinking it's basically like soccer, like football. You have like these teams, but instead of being football teams, you have like these parties or these political leaders, and everyone is just cheering for whatever they say, for whatever happens, right? And I'm happy if they win. I'm sad if they lose, regardless of how good they played. In this case, of how good their ideas are, and it makes total sense. And like I think that the problem is that we keep thinking that in order to educate kids, like there's this Twitter account called Rebel Educator, which I really recommend, and they put out a tweet last week, I think, asking what's something on the traditional system, the educational system, that really bugs you, that irritates you, or makes you angry. And I was like, and my answer was clear. Like I in the moment, I knew what I was going to answer, which is the lack of ambition. Because what happens is, like, education to me is like the best tool there is in for humanity to grow. And current traditional educational system has access to almost all the future minds. Of course, you have a lot of projects in homeschooling, which is great, but like most people, I would say like 80% of the people are still going to the traditional system. And yet we're not encouraging them to be the great minds that I can be. We're aiming at like for them to be like mediocre, right? We're not aiming at each of these individual minds to develop their full potential, regardless of the area. We're saying you're all going to be exactly the same. And that makes me angry because, as you were saying, like, and you put it very well. Like, improvisation gives you a lot of confidence, especially because you're failing a lot. Because you're playing notes that don't make sense, right? But you became like decentivized to it. Like you make a mistake and you're like, oh, okay, learning. You don't even like see it as a mistake. And in music, you play a wrong note and you keep playing it over and over and over again until suddenly people are like, oh, maybe he's doing that on purpose. I'm not. I'm just repeating the mistake until you guys suddenly think, oh, maybe he's doing the right thing. And so you end up developing this relationship with failure that brings a lot of confidence. And it's funny that confidence is not something we teach, right? In traditional system, right? And it should be, because if we have like the most confident people, will have the best results, right? We'll have someone who like, and I'm not talking about ego, of course. I'm talking about real confidence, rooted in serving others, but also in like the best version of oneself. And if you have like these confident people, they will have a tremendous impact on the world. They'll follow the best ideas for them. They'll be individual and critical thinkers. But we're not aiming at that. We're aiming at having a set of kids or of students that behaves the same way and plays the same games. And usually you have either a status game where I'm focusing on, oh, okay, so I need to go to that college, because if I'm not going to that college, I'm not going to be good. Or I need to have that job, because if I don't get that job, I'm going to be a failure, right? Or I need to keep studying and do a master degrees and a thesis and all these different things until like, and all of those things are good to some people, but to think that that's a generalization that we can make to most of individuals, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And I think that even more than free thinking, free thinking should be, of course, part of it, but like helping people to develop confidence in themselves and to be able to pursue things that are interesting to them should be like a clear focus on educational system. And unfortunately, it's not. And I'm happy to see that there's an ever more growing number of companies just trying to promote alternatives to that, to the traditional system. But we still have a long path to walk. And yeah, but that's a great principle to hold, like seeking to develop the confidence in students would be like a very good step to then solve other problems, like whatever you want to do and like being critical thinkers and all that stuff, at least to me.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, one exercise that I can think of that's kind of funny is, imagine a lion pride using our education system, right? With their cubs. It's just, what are you going to get? Basically, you're going to get cubs that never have the confidence to kind of go out there and do the hunt themselves, and would always look behind their shoulder to like see what mama and papa are saying or thinking, and really looking for instruction all the time, even as adults, and it just doesn't work like that. You don't have your father or mother to give you instructions all the time, and then that's still how we raise children, to always go consult somebody who knows. And that's just a good way of controlling people, because then they are predictable. They don't make a weird move all of a sudden, or a career change, or chasing a dream, or anything like that. Now, I don't usually go on this trope of, slamming everything and everybody. I don't think there's actually a lot of malice behind it, or like bad intentions, but it's just how things are. And the result is that I recently made the point to someone that domesticated animals, and this is a fact, like especially dogs, let's say, in effect, when we domesticate an animal, we make it stay adolescent for the rest of its life. It's like even adult dogs are puppy-like in nature compared to wild wolves, right?
Yeah.
And we have to remember that in many senses, we are a domesticated species at this point.
Yeah.
And because we are, I think that many of the children we raise in our education system turn out to be adults, but what we call an adult is really very far from what the potential is for a human to be, as you say. We are so far from realizing potential as individual, confident, free-thinking animals who make reasoned choices about things. And again, I don't think it's so much about bad intentions, but it could be. I mean, it certainly serves people who want to be powerful, because you can only be powerful if you have people who are primed to be compliant with orders. Well, if you try to give an order to somebody who is independent in their thought, they're just going to tell you no. And that's it. And of course, we know that every nation, and it doesn't matter what, the million people who are listening to one dictator, or it can be 150 million, they could take out the dictator, but there's a reason they don't. So we usually place the blame on the dictator, which we should. But the people who really care about freedom, I think they should just invest as much time as they do in protesting the dictator, which is sometimes too risky to do, in just simply raising their children differently and telling them and, preparing the next generation to be free thinkers who would not comply with unjust orders or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that's part of education as well. And I would say, though, that in my experience, human beings have a hard time to be completely free in their thinking. And in that sense, like having a peer group of people that are giving their best to be critical thinkers as well, that's something that really helps. Because if the only people that you know are people that are exactly on the same context as you are, say they go to the same classes or they took the same courses, they're working the same place, if those are your peers, you'll quickly, maybe without realizing, you'll be submitted to dogma, to whatever dogma happens on that context, either the office or school or whatever. And so, because it's really hard for human beings, in my experience, to just be able to sit completely free and come up with all these ideas with this very individual worldview. At least I'm not there yet. But one of the things that it definitely helps is to surround myself with people that are very different, that are also critical thinkers, and that challenge me on my views, and I can do the same with them, right? And that's another thing that the educational system does a lousy job at. Because the peers that you're having are all of them are being submitted to the same idea that you are, right? And it's not a coincidence that they use the word submission, right? Because there's a submissive aspect in education. Like there's this whole theory of Paulo Coelho, which is a Brazilian pedagogical thinker, that he has this theory of the safe theory, where basically the banking theory, where the teachers are these banks full of knowledge, and the job of the students is to open their safe, store that knowledge, close that safe, and that's it. Like, and that's the way we look at education. And so maybe one of the things could be, well, let's first of all focus on interactions, because kids will also have things to say. They'll also have experiences, and they'll also have knowledge that maybe you don't have, right? And not only that, but also making sure that we are surrounded these kids with kids, students, adults, whatever. We're surrounding these learners with people that don't believe the same thing as they do, and by putting them in these groups, I believe because it's my case, in the case of people that I admire, and you're of course one of them, your thinking just gets better because you're constantly being bombarded by either great ideas that you never thought about, or you're exposing your ideas and getting feedback on them. And sometimes that feedback is, oh, that's such a great point, I never thought about it. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe this makes sense, this resonated. Or maybe the feedback is, look, have you ever thought about this, about that in this perspective or in that perspective? And suddenly you're like, oh, okay, I need to improve my thinking because I never thought about that, right? So those elements, that's something that's not present in the educational system, and it should be. And we should be aiming at least bringing those elements to more students, regardless of age, so they can become better at their own thinking. And I do believe, just to finish my point, that that's a fundamental step in getting to what I call a modern golden age. Because, and I wrote about this, I have this whole theory about why high schoolers specifically are the key for us to get there, because we need to help them to develop like their current thinking into a way that allows them to live purpose-led lives, meaning they're individual thinkers, they're pursuing things that make sense to them, they're solving problems that they want to solve, but also have an impact on humanity as a whole. Because if you do this and they start to live purpose-led lives, they will live a better life, of course. But not only that, but if you have like two high schoolers that started to live purpose-led lives when they were high schoolers and suddenly they're adults and they're educating their children, they'll educate it in a far, far different way than someone who just went to the traditional path, right? I was fortunate enough to meet your family, and the way you're educating like your daughter, it's clearly the way that someone who does not you're not submissive to the current traditional educational system, and because of that you're educating your daughter in a far much different way than, say, someone who just went through the traditional route, and it is going to instill those ideas in their children. So if we find a way to help high schoolers or to help young students to develop all these skills and live purpose-led lives, eventually they will educate their sons in a far more different way, and that will create like this ripple effect and this systematic change in the way we educate children, and we can finally get to the modern golden age. And that's my theory.
I relate with that so much, and I think there's such an interesting thing to explore there, because improvisation and focusing more on fittingness and creating a harmony on the go, rather than coming with some sort of grand plan. I mean, if we look at humanity so far, ever since we've become an industrialized society, there's a strong bias towards this control aspect of things. So everything is very controlled, and we have a plan, we go execute it, and we achieve great things technologically, but it's very debatable whether we're actually getting any happier in the process or are living better lives in the process. So I always have to concede that the lives of Neolithic hunter-gatherers who were eaten for breakfast by lions, that's one aspect, but actually it doesn't say that their lives up until that point weren't good. And we need to find a point in the center there that is kind of a compromise, because it's almost a paradox, and I myself have to think about it more, and maybe you will have a good insight about this. But it's really interesting how improvising, just doing the thing, not knowing how it's going to end, actually consistently produces better things in the end, rather than I could say that it's just imposing something with force, or with even stronger word, violence, on something. It's going to have a predictable outcome, but there's going to be a whole lot of entropy somewhere else, which is exactly what we see with the ecosystems which we inhabit. So we finally make this amazing thing that's like the metro in Lisbon, or a whole city, or whatever they do in Switzerland, like smashing the atoms together, the CERN thing, the Hadron Collider. We can achieve these things, but in order to do that, there's a different part of the globe that we haven't considered as part of the plan, which now lays in ruins, right? So there's a rainforest that's not there anymore because it wasn't part of our thinking, because our thinking wasn't holistic enough, right? Yeah. Whereas if we interacted moment by moment with things and thought about things holistically, we would get maybe at a later point, and that's maybe not even, but it would maybe take us a bit longer to get to the level of technology that we have. But all the while, we would continue to be people who flourish and do well in life. And, thinking about philosophically, we probably would decide to do something that's not so technologically advanced, but which, the process actually involves feeling good throughout the time.
In more harmonious growth, more harmonic, I'm not saying so, but bringing more harmony to human growth. That makes total sense. Like, the way I think about this is, and once again, I know I'm jumping back to music metaphors and just going all the way, but like it's easier for me to speak that way. So when you're a musician and you're starting to learn how to improvise, you actually don't learn how to improvise. What happens is you learn certain patterns and then you impose those patterns in music, right? And if I say like a C major chord, I know that, this line that I have, or this pattern that I study on the guitar will sound great, so I'll play that. And technically it makes sense, and it does sound good because if that's the chord, those notes fit, but it goes against the flow of the music, right? And so, but in the beginning, you need to do this. You need to learn all these patterns and try to impose them on music until suddenly you realize, as a lot of musicians do, as I did, I know this is sounding good, but it's not what I want to play. And there's this difference, because I believe as a musician, and maybe as human beings as well, we want the greater good, right? And sometimes wanting the greater good is to do things that maybe are not that easy, or they're not even the things that are supposed to be done, but the things that we really want to do, right? And so that's when real improvisation begins. I usually say that I spent 3 years learning how to just play notes at random, and then I started to improvise, because it was a moment where I realized, well, I'm tired of patterns, and I want to come up with something that truly comes from my inside, right? I want to be able to play whatever I'm feeling to play, and that was only possible because, first of all, I had studied all the patterns, and those weren't serving anymore, and I stopped wanting to play and started to understand what the music wants me to play, right? So basically, if I want to say it in another way, would be I stopped rationalizing so much and started to play more intuitively with my intuition. And you can only do that. You can only take decisions in an intuitive way by being very aware of whatever happening around you, right? And this brings back to the point that you were saying about being holistic, because the reason why we're able to have the connection you were making, the subway in Lisbon, and then you have an Amazon forest, the Amazon forest that's going down, is because when I made the decision that promoted one and denied the other, I wasn't aware that I was denying that. I was only focused on my thing, right?
Yes.
And once again, I think that ties back to the educational system in a way, which is basically I'm being programmed to be to play the game that's in front of me, right? All that game, the competition game, the growth game, the best grade game, right? And if I want to have the best grade, and if I want to have the best grade, I won't be worried about how my peer is doing. I don't care about them. Right? And if we see this in a small class, where if I'm following this game, I don't care about other people's grades. I want my grade because I want to be the best, because I want to get into whatever college it is. if we're not able to see this in a small class, how can we expect to see that as the global scale, right? But the problem is that our thinking is molded by the educational system, and the educational system is promoting precisely that type of thinking. The focus on whatever's in front of you, on your path, forget about the others. What matters is you, right, as an individual. And so by switching that, by helping people to become more aware, even if it's just their surroundings, their families, their peer groups, just become more aware of those. Maybe if we do that, we can start like this ripple effect once again that helps us the next time that we make a big decision to think about not only like I'm going to build this particle collider that's 3 times better than the one that they have in Switzerland, but instead of thinking about this way, and I may think, well, but if I do this, what effects will that have on the kids in Nigeria, for instance? Because that's where I'm going to get the lithium to build whatever it is, right? And so I think that's, and I'm not sure if this is a solution, but like that would be like, to me, like a route that we could explore to increase the awareness of our surroundings in order to become more holistic thinkers.
No, absolutely. I think, this really takes from the jazz sessions that you mentioned, and on this podcast I discussed improv theater before with Paul Valancourt and Nico Sabatil, and it always is striking how this teaches you, just what you said, make the other people in the band sound good. And it really puts you in a situation that is really interesting because you are able to then transcend yourself, right? And really give your soul to something bigger than yourself, which just inherently feels good to us. And I think that a lot of people, and this is kind of a sickness probably in the West, is the strong attachment to the ego and to the self, are afraid that if you transcend something or you don't get the credit, like we really want to get the credit still. And for that, I think we break down the positive sum game into a zero sum game, because then we can make sure that there's a credit out there to be given to us and us only. Of course, we miss completely the point that, actually having other people who are happy around us, which is the equivalent of people who sound better in a band. Like the analogy would be people who are doing well in your family, in your village. These greatly assist us in actually living well. And also any kind of symphony, even though you're transcended and you're just maybe a small part in a band, 1/4 of a band, or if it's a whole symphony, really, you may be one of 100 players or something. People can still break it down and analyze it and see, this part is doing its part really well and this part is performing really well. And you're not gone. The people who can perceive the harmony and are willing to analyze the thing which you participate in are actually going to see the role that you play in it. And because they also are committed to a positive sum game, they're actually going to reach out to you and say, good job, João, and you're not going to suffer from this annihilation of the ego that I think many of us are so afraid of. And we're afraid of, again, education system, culture, we're taught to be afraid of that.
Yeah. And like in that example, I like 2 ideas a lot. So the first one is, when you have a small part to play in that 100 orchestra playing that symphony, and you're like, oh, I don't have the credit. I think that the question is, like, what credit do you want? Because if you want the credit from the audience, sure, you won't get it. But like the 5 musicians that are like near to you, they need your note in order to know where the symphony is to play. Right. So if you focus on the credit that the audience will give you, you'll get none. Like if you're in a symphony, like there's 2 people that are going to get the credit. 3, basically. The conductor, the first violinist, and if there's a soloist, the soloist. Everyone else just like
probably.
But probably the composer is dead, basically, because we don't have modern symphonies.
Doesn't care.
Yeah, it doesn't work. But like, but you won't get that credit. But like the other musicians around you will be damn grateful that you're playing like the role, and they'll give you the whole credit. So that's something that's very important. The second one
Great point.
and I truly believe this, like, if you're one of those people that are able to go through a score in symphony and understand, oh, maybe this clarinet right here, we don't hear it as the main melody, but like, actually, this single note is what makes this chord sound like, because this happens a lot in music. So you'll have like a band playing a bunch of different things, but like you have like this specific instrument, a set of instruments playing one note that makes the chord actually sound good. Well, otherwise would be just like this weird thing, but like that one note that pierces through is actually what holds it all together. And if you're someone who can actually analyze that, I think that you have the duty to go around with people that cannot analyze and say, look, let me show you something. You see this whole score? The only reason why you think that this sounds good is because these guys are doing that and that. And if people were understanding that, they'll be like, oh, really? That's awesome. I had no idea. I was just listening to the violins doing ba 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 ba, instead of listening to that guy over there that has like this pedal note, this very low note saying ba, that allows for everything else to come together, right? So I truly believe that that's important as well. If you're someone who is able to understand like the harmony, not only in music, but like in any other craft, right? If you're able to understand that, I think you have a duty to go around and teach that to other people so other people can notice it and they can also understand it better and have more and feel not only more grateful, but more appreciative of the fact that there's this one clarinet holding all the band together. And instead of being focused on this very crazy violinistic solo, that's great and you should value that, but also don't forget to value like that single clarinet that's holding the band all together by playing that single note. And I think if you understand that, you have a moral duty to inform others so they can.
I love these points. AJ Jacobs, who's been on this podcast, wrote a whole book where he went and said thank you to anybody involved with his cup of coffee that he drinks in the morning. So, that took him all over the world. But it strikes me as a good example of somebody who's actually appreciating the fact that it takes a lot to produce one cup of coffee. It's not just the barista, it's not just the driver who brought it, but also for the person who grew it in Colombia or wherever. So shout out to AJ about that. I think that's a brilliant idea to show how we're interconnected. And it goes around that even though you might not know somebody by name, you understand that there is credit to be given to them and there is appreciation. And I think that if you look at it, like it's something that I noticed in my life, people will be a lot more willing to get dirty, like physically dirty, and do the jobs that we consider menial, like assembly line worker or something like that. Actually, if you have a group of people who are good friends who are doing something, it really doesn't matter what you're doing, right? You might as well be doing assembly line work. What does it matter? You're having a great time with friends, and that's going to make any kind of job a good thing, like you say, because really assembly line workers, if they develop faster ways to like move the parts around, it's almost like improvising like a jazz band at any point. And I think that if we look at jobs that people don't want to be doing, like hard labor jobs and stuff like that, I think that would change a lot if people would actually get credit and recognition that they're doing something important. Like I know I, in the past, got to do some things which were completely inconsequential and unimportant, but because I was doing them as part of a group, it was great fun.
And to add on that point, like I think that sometimes we think about, the education system is wrong. Everyone should be like these entrepreneurs and these software engineers and these musicians and these artists. And I'm like, well, no, like there's people doing those kinds of jobs that love it. Like you were recently in Portugal and we met in Alcobaça, and like one of the things that you told me was that you were surprised by how clean the streets, everything was. And I told you that, well, that's because at 6 a.m. there's a lot of people that just wake up and they just pick up all the garbage from the last night, so that when people wake up at 8 a.m., 8:30, they can go around the streets and go like, oh, this is so clean, amazing, right?
Right.
And so I remember that because I knew that a few years ago when I was still living in Alcoas, I would get up really early to go to run and to go running, and every time that I met one of those, I would say good morning. I remember that there was this one person that I kept running up to, and one day I finished my race, my run near him, and we just chatted for a bit. And he told me that he had been doing that for like, I don't know, almost like 10 years, and he loved it because he felt that he was helping the people to just go around and have more fun, right? And back then, I still believed that idea that, oh, everyone should be like this big entrepreneur or this like
make
success.
Something with your life.
Yeah. And suddenly, like he telling me that was like, oh, yeah, there's people that are going to enjoy this, right? And once that happened, I once again, my awareness was raised up to a way where I could see that there are people that in my old view I would look at and think, oh, maybe this person doesn't like what he's doing. Maybe he needs help to just win more skills and to be able to do it, another thing. But if we talk with these people, there are some of them that need that help, but a lot of them just enjoy doing that, right? And so, like, I think that there's also part of what you're saying in a sense that is, first of all, of course, it's awesome to get credit, but also like there are people that are so passionate about their jobs, regardless of kind of job that is, that they're happy basically. They're happy in doing that, and I think it's important for us to be appreciative of that, of course, and give them credit if they want, but also to not. And this is a message more for me than from anybody else, but just to remind me of not judging whoever is in front of me doing a job that I thought, oh, that job is not, he doesn't deserve that job. No, he deserves it because that's what he wants to do, right? And to raise that awareness, I think it's something very important, at least to me, once again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What is something that you're improvising these days? Like, how does it show up in your life today, the improvisation?
Yes. So first of all, one of them is still music, like this year, and I want to take that to next year as well. Like I did a bunch of concerts that were 100% improvised. So I would just go with the guitar, with the loop pedal, and I would just ask for someone to say a note, and usually people know, like C, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they would say, oh, like A minor, and from there on I would improvise like a bunch of different songs. So that's one way. The other way is conversations, like this, not only being interviewed in your podcast, but also interviewing other people on the podcast, on my own podcast. Like that's also a way where improvisation appears in my life. And finally, like I'm doing as a freelancer, I'm doing a bunch of workshops and training sessions, and that's also always a context where I use a lot of improvisation as well. So I guess those would be like the big three. And then I try to improvise on the kitchen, doing some kind of dish, but usually it doesn't go that well. So I still need to work on the competence part of that.
It will.
Not yet. Yeah. But I think those would be some of the areas.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I really like this conversation. And before we wrap up, I'd like you to make more explicit what this podcast of yours is about. I've been on it. Yeah. It was great fun, and I listened to several other episodes and loved them all. So you can share that with people and anything else that you want.
Yeah. So the podcast is called the Modern Golden Age Podcast. I believe that humanity can actually be on the brink of getting into a modern golden age. And even though I don't know what that looks like, I want to interview a lot of people that have different ideas about it and try to understand the common patterns so we can have like this guide field to get there. So the podcast is the Modern Golden Age Podcast. You can also follow me, like most of my ideas are either on Twitter at João L. Mateus. And I can send the link to you so you can add it on the show notes. And also if you want to read like my bigger ideas, my bigger essays, that would be once again joaoelmateus.substack.com. And please hit me up. I love talking with people. I love to know more people, to make more friends online. That's something I learned a lot with you. So anyone that wants to reach out, please do. And I would love to talk with you.
That's awesome. What does the L stand for in João El Mateus?
It's it's another one of my surnames, which is Lopes. So my full name is João Lopes Mateus. Yeah.
Nice. This is fantastic, João. Really had a great time just riffing with you on that. And I think I'm getting a better idea of what a modern golden age would be. I know I shared my vision, but now I'm thinking another way of saying it would be just when humanity finally fucking gets up and starts playing jazz right.
Yes, that's the definition right there. I'm going to print that and just have it on a wall because it makes 100% sense. Thank you so much, Al. It was a real pleasure to be here. It was really fun. And I hope we can talk.
Till next time. Muito obrigado.
Yeah, obrigado.